Hello, welcome to Squishy Vision, where I'm about to yawn. Um, and then once we get this yawn out of the way, give my reaction to um Rings of Power, the Eagle, and the Scepter. I'm gonna try and get this as quick as possible because it's 11:30. I gotta go and get to bed because I've been shattered recently. But this series is getting even stronger with each episode. And now we finally caught up with all of our main kind of, I guess, factions is a good way to describe them. Now that we return to Numenor, and I'm really loving the kind of, I mean, my favorite thing about this episode, and I think that both series as a dwarves, I'm just fascinated by the interplay and the relationships and the interactions and the dynamic between Deezer and Durin and King Durin, and just the way that they're all like they're antagonistic about being great and antagonistic about being frustrating. With like they both they're all coming from like genuinely like there's no miscommunication. That's the thing. That's what I like. It's not so often in these situations. It's lazy writing. The conflict comes from miscommunication, but here everyone is actually open and understanding of each other. They just disagree. That's happening a lot actually. That happens with the elves as well. I mean, there's some like deception, but that's not what I mean. That's like what I'm talking about is like non-deliberate miscommunication. So, you know, Elrond and Galadriel are communicating, and they just are approaching things from opposite sides. Durin and Disa and King Durin, they're all communicating. We just all have different opinions, and there's not like, I mean, you could side with one or the other, but it's clear what they're arguing. No one's coming from like a place of just like absolute like insanity. Um, I mean, with my limited understanding of pre-Lord of the Rings lore, and from the perspective of the characters who don't have that dramatical irony perspective, um, there's no clear kind of like we're paying like we know that the elves shouldn't be stigmatized against, and they're generally wise and good folk. So Mirel and Elendil being pro-elf isn't a bad thing, but from the perspective of the people, Muriel sided with the elves, and then a whole bunch of Numenor people got killed. And it's like it makes sense. And even like we know that certain Numenorans are like were plotting against her, but it wasn't like they didn't have to deceive. Everyone's clear about this. No one has to be deceived. No miscommunication. It was conflict that actually was written well. Um, even Theo and Arandir, the elf, like even they're being honest and communicating with each other. They just disagree on things. It's good conflict. I think that's actually what I really liked about this series. The conflict is generally good written well, and because it's good written, and because it's written well, the politics of the show is engaging to watch. It's I think that's often what frustrates me with like shows which try to do similar things, and I get kind of just turned off and like I zone out, and it's because the writing is done poorly. So conflicts have to be manufactured. When the conflicts are genuine, you are much more. I am much more inclined to kind of just get swept away with it. The action is all right. And here's the thing: when you start adding like I'm not a fan of gore. I've made that clear. I don't like TV gore. Not like I'm not against it, like an ethical kind of or like or like a decency perspective. I just don't like seeing gore. And so God knows I've had to like watch these shows with a plot synopsis, scrolling a little bit ahead to make sure that I'm not considering that I don't like. I think what really like put me off the first season was the two very graphic bone snapping things, and I'm very sensitive to bone snapping because I have a bone disability, so it kind of just makes me a bit cringe. Not in like the embarrassing way, in a kind of actual like uncomfortable kind of discomfort kind of way, that lives in my head. So, but also I think a lot of the kind of like violence nowadays, things like blood sprays. I think blood sprays are really hard to do well, and I think they're really hard to do with CGI. But a lot of things do blood sprays with CGI, and it just looks okay. So let's compare two instances of blood in this episode. When I'm blanking on the bloody elf's name. I don't want to be pronouncing it wrong. Yeah, Arondir. When Arondir saves Isildur and fights those wild men. There's oh gosh, I just got my camera. There's parts where he also, you can't do that with an arrow. You can't cut someone's. I mean, maybe you can with the elven arrow, but like, it's not how you use arrows. Anyway, I'm sorry, besides the point. When you cut someone's neck with an arrow, there's like a spurt of blood, and I just, because it's CGI, it looks very dense, looks very thick. It looks like it's just Jello being spit out of someone's neck, and it kind of takes you out. Versus the scene where Isildur has a dagger pulled out of his thigh, and it's just pooling blood. And that looks more realistic, and I know I genuinely know what that looks like in real life because I've had to treat someone with that injury. So like, even when you like to push away from the whole like graphic violence perspective, I wish in the combat we just like, because also, to be fair, blood tends to take a second to actually spurt out, so it's fairly still realistic to have those like deaths and not have to have like blood be obvious in that moment.
Motion detected at the front.
Like in the, I think that's also a thing. Like, the blood's too obvious, and in real life it wouldn't be that obvious. I don't think anyway. To be fair, I've never seen a genuine like, sword injury happen. I've seen injuries happen from other things in other ways, but not like that. So, Alexa, volume 0. I didn't realize that went off like until the second. Like, it went off, and I just zoomed it out in my head, and I was like, oh wait, that was loud. So sorry about that. But other than that, the bits of the spiders are brutal. I had to like watch with like my fingers because I was worried it was going to jump out. I don't think it's clear. Collider is assuming it's Shelob. I don't think it is necessarily confirmed to be Shelob, but certainly that spider thing was a very good horror segment. Part where that orc's head got splooshed. Okay, let's end on another point I want to make. And that's the orcs. So I think the show is going some level to humanize orcs. It paints Sauron as an oppressor rather than just their master. That they have free will and desires and don't want necessarily to be used as tools in the way that the original Lord of the Rings films don't do. I don't know what how much text goes into it, but orcs. Okay, here's the thing. Orcs are inherently problematic. They are, and they always have been, in just the way they're designed. Like, orcs aren't real; they're fictional, and every way they've been constructed, as tribalistic, as thuggish, as animalistic, as brutal, as savage, often painted with dark or earthy color skin, wearing, uncivilized clothing and armor and things like that. Very, very, very strongly coded as like, savage tribes in real life. Like, you can't get away from that. I'm sorry, you cannot get away from that as their base elements. The same thing the Klingons as space orcs have come from. So many other kind of things, and like, it's clear that, I mean, they're racist. Like, orcs are inherently racist. In their origin, you betray your heroes as fair, clean skin, Aryan looking people, and your monsters whenever historically propaganda was created to like demonize people of color, demonize black people, demonize people from other parts of the world. They are depicted in ways which are frankly orcish, and there's a strong connection between the two. Does that say we have to cancel orcs? No, and I think that we can still use orcs. There's still use orcs as a plot device. And there's two ways you can go about it. You can either just remove. Here's the thing: I'm very much against the idea of any fictional race that is portrayed as sapient being portrayed as monopolistically bad. Either your evil race acts on instinct, and then in which case it can be good or bad for simply tools, or they're created automatons or artificial creatures created by a force of evil, like demons or whatever, or if you give them the ability to do choice, then they can't all choose to be bad. Because the second you say that a race inherently all chooses to be bad, that is a direct commentary on as direct social commentary. That is a deliberate thing, a deliberate commentary on race in real life. The idea that it's a common thing, like it's a common thing to be even now. It's like, oh, this person is from this minority group or this background of this country, therefore they must believe this, and this, which we're going to demonize. And you use that example. You take example of a few people who believe this kind of thing, assume that everyone else that background believes the same thing because they're all the same, and that's how you demonize a group of people. That's literally what's happening here. And orcs are fictional, but they're based off a stereotype, and that stereotype, if you're a white person, that stereotype is going to be in your head. It is ingrained to you by popular culture. It is a deliberate thing. That's why we have these creatures in popular culture, because it seeds that thought in your mind. So either you have orcs as absolute monsters and you dehumanize them completely, and even then you've got to be careful because orcs are, and this is what I like about Star Trek Discovery. It's made that diversity of color in the Klingons. So you get blue Klingons, you get grey Klingons, you get purple Klingons, you get these alien colors. So they're not all just in brown face. Because as much as like Deep Space Nine did a lot to culturally broaden the perspective of Klingons, and not make them a flat bad guy race, but actually have nuance and diversity and like everything like that, they all were still pretty much mostly people in brown face. And Discovery, at least, for its credit, well, I say to its credit as if I'm not a big Discovery stan anyway, but Discovery made that diversity. So if you don't go to the approach of tackling orcs as a dehumanized group of people, you have to then give them the nuance. And this show is like touching on that very, very loosely. I don't think it's aiming to kind of do anything, and certainly 3 episodes in, I don't think it's going to spend a lot of time on that. But I'm all for that. Is it taking anything from the original lore? I don't know. Tolkien is a great writer. He certainly had a lot of liberal and progressive ideas, but he's also a product of his time, and almost certainly had some racist opinions. And I think that's coded very heavily in Lord of the Rings when you have the heroes as the men of the West and the bad guys as the men of the East, and I think that's inherently existent in that. And I don't know why people are so protective over the Lord of the Rings lore. Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, wrote The Hobbit, wrote that expanded world as a myth. His intention was to create an English myth, an English legend, but was purely from the original creation of English, of an English story. Like I've seen things about him comment that things like Saint George and the dragon and all these kind of things, they borrowed a lot from like Germanic European lore. His idea was to create purely like English legend, and the whole point of a legend myth is that you derive from it. Like you steal, you take, you rewrite, you add, you create, you entrench it. If that was Tolkien's intent, no one should be offended that that's what we're doing with his piece of work. Also, Tolkien very much framed the Lord of the Rings universe as this like history, this found history, this very old ancient history. And the thing about history is you constantly find new materials, you constantly find new details, new artifacts, you uncover new things, you recontextualize old things. What does it matter if Adar wasn't in his original character Rings of Power? Maybe just when Tolkien translated the book. Is it the Red Book? Translated the Red Book into Lord of the Rings. That wasn't mentioned because he wasn't someone that the Hobbits knew about, but we since have known about. Or this is just a TV show that someone's made based off his history, and we have biopics all the time that add characters, add fake people, because you can't be completely. It's not a documentary. It's not a docudrama. It's a biopic. So you take whichever one of those interpretations that you want. And if we're gonna in the same way that we can tell historical stories, and add in more modern commentary, we can do that with Lord of the Rings and pretend it's a fake history. Like, stop being so protective over Lord of the Rings canon. It defeats the whole point of the Lord of the Rings canon. Christopher Tolkien is allegedly equally guilty of this, and I don't really get it because it kind of defeats the whole point. So, did I make my point? I can't remember if I made my point about or ends it halfway through. But I'm going to quit while I'm ahead because I think I made some decent points there. That's my thoughts. There's 3 episodes out of 8 in. I think we've tackled where all the major players are at this point. So now we need to continue the story. 5 episodes. It's taken us 3 episodes of 5 to kind of establish what everyone is. So the next 3 episodes have been very, very well constructed, efficient storytelling, compacted, flow very well, give you that middle third, which is where the bulk of your story is, because that leaves the last 2 to wrap up, I think, this season and indeed the entire show, because I think it was always intended to be a 2-season show. So that's my thoughts about this episode. Let me know what you think, and I am going to go and get on with my life. So goodbye.